I'll block your reflection with a little solemn judgment.
Solemn, one of the most powerful cards in Edison format. But ask yourself, do you know how to properly use this card? Before getting into the video, shoutouts to all my Patreons. For those interested in joining the team, check out the link in the description. When a monster would be summoned or a spell trap card is activated, pay half your life points, negate the summon or activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Solemn 101. What Solemn can do. 1. Negate the activation of inherent summons, spells, and trap cards. Now the key word here, or key words rather, are activation and inherent summons, which means Solemn Judgment cannot negate cards that have already been activated, such as a Black Whirlwind's effect, or the summons of monsters that are not inherent. For example, if I go Summon Deep Sea Diva and I activate Diva's effect, you cannot Solemn Diva's effect that would summon another monster. You can, however, Solemn the initial summon of Diva because it is a normal summon. In this example, you can see my opponent chose to not activate his face-down Solemn Judgment on the activation of my Future Fusion. 2 turns later, when Absolute Zero comes out, he attempts to activate Solemn Judgment. However, at this point, he's lost his opportunity because 1, the activation of Future Fusion was done 2 turns ago, and 2, Zero is coming out through an effect. It's not an inherent summon. So, if Solemn Judgment cannot truly negate everything, then why do duelists use Solemn Judgment? And the answer is quite simple. Because within the confines of Edison format, it is the omni-negate. Unlike Advanced format, which has a variety of different cards that can stop many different plays, Edison format has very few omni-negates. Of course, there are some, such as Stardust Assault Mode, but these are not commonly seen in the Edison meta. Now, paying half your life points to activate this card is quite a hefty cost, and this raises a topic of discussion. Is the half the life points that you pay worth keeping this card in your deck? And here's my answer. It depends. But let's compare it to a card that has a similar cost, Return from a Different Dimension. Solemn, when you activate it, it's not always going to be gained. However, in most cases, when you flip up Return from a Different Dimension, it is gained. This is why cards such as Return from a Different Dimension see more popularity in the current Edison meta than Solemn Judgment. Nevertheless, bear in mind, life points in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are a resource. As long as they do not deplete to 0, you're free to use as much as your life points as you want to activate various cards and effects. And this is what makes cards like Return from a Different Dimension and Solemn Judgment so powerful. Now, let's learn how to use Solemn Judgment following my simple 3-step approach. Step number 1, you should only use or set Solemn Judgment after you already have an established board. By doing so, this will make your board near unbreakable. This is a common practice in Advanced format. Of course, Solemn Judgment is not actively played. However, the general strategy of most decks is establishing a board with monsters that have Omni-like potent effects. Step number 2, you should use Solemn Judgment when you're stopping a crucial play. What defines as a crucial play? Well, of course, the answer always depends. But cards such as Brain Control, Mind Control, Heavy Storm, generally limited cards, Stratos, etc., are often good cards to activate Solemn Judgment upon. In addition to this, it's also good to use Solemn Judgment when your opponent is activating a card that has a cost. For example, if your opponent activates D-Draw or Solar Recharge, this is two cards, the card that they're paying for the cost and the card itself, the activation card. If you Solemn Judgment this type card, then yes, you'll lose half your life points, but your opponents will lose two cards and their effect will be negated. This is the same type of scenario even with cards such as Regeki Break and Phoenix Wing Blast. However, those cards usually are not as impactful to Solemn because they're not trying to draw through their deck. Nevertheless, it's good to bear this tip in mind. Lastly, it's good to use Solemn when you can destroy multiple back rows. So what does it mean being able to destroy multiple back rows? If your opponent opens up many back rows and sets the majority of them, such as set 4, set 5, likely they have a card such as Starlight Road or Solemn Judgment set behind their back rows to protect them. So if you draw into your Heavy Storm, what you should do is first set your Solemn Judgment, and then on the following turn, activate your Heavy Storm. When you activate your Heavy Storm, your opponent will respond with Starlight Road or Solemn Judgment, and then you can Solemn that card in return, thereby resolving your Heavy Storm and destroying, wiping out all of their back rows. So keep this in mind. In the example shown before you, I opened Solemn Judgment along with multiple other back rows. Take note of how I choose to play this hand. I do not set Solemn along with the other back rows because Heavy Storm has yet to be played. Moreover, other than the back rows themselves, there is nothing to protect with Solemn Judgment. Therefore, I wait until I have an established board before setting Solemn Judgment and the other back rows. Here, Solemn Judgment is used to stop a crucial play. My opponent activates Brain Control, which, if successfully resolved, would have been lethal toward myself. In this last example, you can see Solemn Judgment being used to stop multiple back rows. As you can see, I opened up a back row heavy hand, but I chose to not set all of my back rows despite having Solemn Judgment once again because it plays into Heavy Storm. Instead, I just choose to set one or two back rows until the time is right. Eventually though, I am forced to set my hand. So I set Heavy Storm, I set Solemn Judgment, and when my opponent has 4 set, I'm able to activate my face down Heavy Storm, he responds with Starlight Road, and I can destroy all his back rows with Solemn Judgment. Warning, just because Solemn is set does not mean you are invincible. In the event it is sniped, you could be in big trouble. Solemn Judgment often gives duelists a sense of false confidence. In this example, my Solemn was unfortunately sniped after I had an established board and I was met with an ill-fated Heavy Storm. Now that we know how to use Solemn, let's learn how to not use Solemn. 1. You should side out Solemn Judgment against aggro decks. Decks that can apply a lot of pressure very quickly, such as Black Wings or Vayu Turbo, I recommend not keeping in Solemn Judgment. Because once you pay the cost of half your life points, it's very easy to lose the duel afterwards. Even decks that typically play cards like Honest, it can be risky to keep Solemn Judgment in. You should also not use Solemn to stop Heavy Storm. Now, don't misunderstand me. Of course, if you have multiple back rows and your opponent activates Heavy, you should activate Solemn Judgment. But my meaning of this phrase is Solemn is best used after power cards such as Heavy Storm have already been used. Now, In the event you have Solemn and one back row, and your opponent activates Heavy Storm, in most cases, it's better just to let both cards be destroyed and let your opponent get the +1. Of course, in Yu-Gi-Oh!, every scenario is different, and it can always depend what that back row is that you're trying to protect and the current state of the game. But generally, it's better to just let the Heavy Storm resolve. Lastly, this tip is one that most duelists don't even consider. If you notice you're going into a game 2 or 3 situation, which will lead into time, you should side out Solemn Judgment, because it'll just be a dead card in that particular game. If you activate it, you lose half your life points, thereby greatly increasing your chance to lose that game. And if you don't activate it, it's just a dead card. So, if you're about to go into time, side out Solemn Judgment. Bonus tips for how to not use Solemn Judgment. You should not just set it turn 1 unless you're anticipating a big play for your upcoming turn. In addition, if you have Gores in your hand, it's not wise to set Solemn because it'll be much harder to summon Gores. In this example, my opponent misused Solemn Judgment on 2 separate accounts. One, he kept it in against an aggro deck like Black Wings. And 2, when Heavy Storm was activated, he should have just let it resolve instead of negating it, since it was only going to protect one back row. And the end result? Game. In this example, Solemn was misused as well, because 1, the game state of Plague Spreader being in the graveyard was not considered, and 2, it was kept in against an aggro deck that utilizes Honest. My closing thoughts surrounding Solemn Judgment are as follows. It is a very powerful card in Edison format that, when used correctly, can be the difference between winning and losing a game. The purpose of this video is not to sway people from using Solemn Judgment, but rather educate and inform them how to properly use the card. Even I myself has seen success with the card when I got 2nd place at the first Ultimate Time Wizard event with it in my main deck. However, Solemn is better in some decks when compared to others, such as Gladiator Beast, which is heavy on spells and traps, or even Black Wings, which would like to keep cards such as Black Whirlwind face up on the field. At the end of the day, it's up to you. Will you continue playing Solemn Judgment? Let me know in the comments below. And with that, guys, ATrueHero out. Peace. Shoutouts to all my current and former members of the Absolute Zero tier. You guys are the real MVP. To everyone else, if you're looking for exclusive content, please check out the Patreon. And remember, there's a hero in all of us.
Subscribe or you too will be sent to the Shadow Realm.